All right, welcome. My name is Gabriela Sepelsa, class of 1990. I'm here to introduce you the president of the Foundation for Enterprise Development and fellow classmate, Ann Beyster. She was unexpectedly unable to fly here from California to be here with us in person, but here she is. Okay, so you're gonna see her. She's gonna deliver her TED Talk, okay, remotely. She has joined us today as executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, We the Owners. Let me tell you about Ann, for those of you who do not know her, and for us, and for those of us classmates who have not kept up with all her accomplishments over the last years. Ann is an accomplished author, producer, and publisher of curricula, books, documentary, films, and multimedia programs on innovation and shared ownership. Her work has been published and broadcasted by Films Media Group, Aspen Institute's Business and Society Program, Amazon, and PBS, among others. She has over 25 years of experience in business and technology management. She's the co-founder of two small business technology accelerators and government R&D transition programs. These are Ann's accomplishments. Let me add two other observations, a personal one and another one from our 1990 yearbook. Okay, Ann is a business engineer heading a foundation. When we think of engineers, we think of formulas, okay? And when we look at the foundation's work, it is mainly about disseminating knowledge via seminars and books, extending grants to do rigorous work. So this is all work her foundation does. The work is mainly centered around words. So we have words and formulas. And here is where MA, in my opinion, has pushed the envelope, because she has harnessed the power of images and documentaries to further enhance ways of conveying the importance of employee ownership, to raise the awareness around this very subject, okay? Just to give you a sense of her commitment. She did not simply hand to someone else production of the documentary and then see you later on when the documentary is done. She didn't do that. She participated in all aspects of production, and later she went even to film school at USC to understand how to do it better. It took 3 years to produce this documentary. It was well thought through, it was very well crafted. So this tells you the level of commitment that she has. To me, this is pushing the envelope. It is also interesting to share a comment she made about the film's critical success. She simply said, "It is unexpected and it is sweet. Looking forward to other films." This is her way. This is the person she is. To end, let me quote from our 1990 yearbook. I don't know who's one of our classmates who wrote it, but I think he did a good job when he said, or she said, I don't know, "She's so incredibly organized that she even has a time schedule for checking her folder in the lobby. But wait, there is more. She runs, she swims, she bikes, and she skis. Living in San Diego, she informs me that swimming now includes ocean swims year-round." Okay, so please welcome Ann Beyster.
Great, I can see you now, and welcome to this session. I'm so glad that you decided to join the session about employee ownership, and I very much wish that I could be there. I have an inner ear infection that prevents me from traveling, but I'm there in spirit. I'd rather be there in person. But I really applaud the MIT Sloan team, Stephen and Haley, who are in the room, way through there. But thank you for pulling this off. And Gabriella, thank you for such a lovely introduction. I think I should just start with telling you why I'm passionate about employee ownership. And that's because I lived it. I started as an engineer, as Gabriella mentioned, and after Sloan School, I worked as a management consultant and an executive in environmental business, but none of this had to do with companies that were owned by their employees.
And in 2000, I joined an employee-owned company. The reason was because I was looking to do something entrepreneurial, but I didn't want to start my own company. And the moment I started at that company, I felt that everybody acted like an owner. We owned because we cared, and we cared because we owned. And there were 42,000 employees in that company. So about 10 years ago, I changed jobs again, and I became president of the nonprofit that Gabriela mentioned, and really to take some of the passion that I had. And can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up, because we just had a. Okay. Okay, I'll continue. I've got something else coming through my earphone. But as long as it's okay.
Health, equity as far as
you can only hear me, right? So I'm good.
Nutrition, healthy food. Again, nutrition.
Okay, so I'm going to continue.
Preventive health. In other words,
so
instead of react, we're going to act.
Okay. So I raised.
Project will start.
So in the nonprofit, what we focus on is raising the understanding of employee ownership through research, education, and policy. And what we've learned. No, I have to stop.
January 30th of 2015.
Okay. Hold on.
We're going to monitor this on a monthly basis.
Do we have interference with another film? Is that what you hear?
Take a look at the human body when it's excess of weight. We saw a picture of one of my neighbors. I don't know. But here's my cousin with all chips and salsa and all that good stuff.
Brandon, we have interference with the film again.
Some of the activities that you can
so why don't you dial in,
riding bikes,
and we'll keep you on the entire time.
Fruit and vegetables, learning how to cook, and take the whole family for a run. Over here we do have
just go back into my computer.
Different measurements as far as obesity in the United States, and there's other types of information here for anybody that's interested. At the end of the presentation, you guys are welcome to come and take a look. Thank you, Patty.
¿Qué tal? Un aplauso para todos. Sí, chicos, pueden pasar a tomar asiento. Gracias. El nervio ya fue.
Okay. Is it just me now? Okay. Can you only just hear me? Yes. Okay. So that's another film I'm working on. And strangely enough, it is now, and obviously it's set in a community that speaks Spanish. And it's a good film. It's about creating a healthy community through community, but I will not digress. Okay, so I'm going to keep my IT guy on because somehow that is actually preventing that clip from running. So I'm going to go forward, and two people in the front, you're going to give me a thumbs up that everything's good, right? That's you two. Excellent. Okay. So let me just let me go back to repeating that from a nonprofit standpoint. Our focus has been to raise the understanding of employee ownership, not only here in the U.S. but internationally through better research, education, and policy. So what we've learned is that when ownership is broad-based, it includes the employees, they're better performing companies, they can improve lives, and they're more prosperous economies. And I'll go into that more. But I think that this is really a good time to be thinking about employee ownership, and why? Well, because capital ownership is increasingly the dominant source of wealth creation, right? Total income. And so capital ownership that is more inclusive of employees can be one way of addressing the widening income inequality that we face today. In a few moments, or actually in a minute or so, you're going to see the trailer of the documentary film that I produced. And as part of the educational initiatives that I had, I was looking for a new way to help others understand the power of employee ownership and short of living it. And so that led me to filmmaking. And in the film, there are 3 companies, and there are personal stories of the founder and other employee owners that are committed to shared ownership and committed to defining success beyond shareholder value. The film we released in December 2012. It was acquired by a significant educational distribution company in New York. Went to 8 film festivals, received 2 awards, was broadcasted on public and cable television, and importantly, is used by hundreds of companies for their employee training, but also by professors in over 100 universities in their curriculum, and that's in the US and in 17 countries so far. So without further ado, let's transition and watch the trailer. Thanks.
My name is Michael Miller. I go by Miller at the brewery. I'm 37 years old. I work for a New Belgium Brewing Company. I treat my job like it's my own business.
We believe in ownership in the United States. We believe in individual responsibility. And we want people to own the things that are core to their existence. Well, somehow or other we forgot to extend that to the workplace.
My name is Carlos Crabtree. I work as a project executive at DPR Construction. DPR Construction is a national builder focused on primarily technical market sectors.
We talked a little bit about the culture and how it would operate, that it would be innovative and different from the traditional construction company.
My name is Wade Andrews. I'm a co-owner of Namaste Solar and also a residential heat installer.
Everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent, and that's really the approach that we bring to our business, that the community, the economy, the environment, they are all connected.
The whole thrust of science is to make the capital worker endlessly and progressively more productive.
The combination of open book management, employee ownership, and what we call high involvement culture, that's an incredibly powerful thing.
Because I'm an owner in New Belgium and there's open book management, that I'm able to do this and do a $500,000 transaction, a warehouse worker, a dock, a forklift driver, they're doing this.
The data's in that it's a piece of the equation that can help your company be successful. And there's a gap, in my opinion, right now between that being taught in business schools and the need for that in business schools. I just can't imagine making an argument that freedom is not the ultimate end game and empowerment. There's no way that that's not the right answer.
I don't think there's a reason to feel like you're giving up control so much as you're collaborating with your coworkers to build something that's even more.
We're not putting gold bricks in our basement. All the money is coming back into this business, and we want you guys to see where that money is going to.
I think American business has come through a serious crisis. Wages have become relatively flat. We need to think about what kinds of corporate organizations are likely to create jobs that will stay in the United States and create stable employment. Capitalism has a problem. It's not that capitalism is wrong, but rather capitalism is right. And the problem is that there aren't enough capitalists.
There are examples where employee ownership wasn't a good fit. It's a two-way equation. The employee has to want to be empowered, have an ownership mentality.
We need to start thinking about the kids and the grandkids and what's going to happen to them if we don't do something different.
It's the security factor. It's the fact that I know my company is going to work hard for each other, and that's what's going to secure the future for myself and my family.
If everybody feels that sense of pride and responsibility, we can change the world and do great things.
Everybody then has the same data, same information,
knows how to play it, all right, knows where they fit in, knows how they make a difference. But at the end of the day, can throw their fist up in the air and say, yeah, I made it and I got it. I didn't get it alone, but I got it with everybody else.
When I think about employee ownership, I think it's about a culture of responsibility, a culture where people feel like taking care of their own future is an opportunity that is presented to them, and then it's up to them to take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, I can see me. I can see, I can almost see you. Okay, and you can hear me?
Yes,
You folks in the front? We're good, okay. Okay, so now you've seen the trailer, and there's more. It's a 52-minute documentary film. And what I'm trying to convey is, by just watching the trailer, what do you think it feels like, and what does it really mean to be an owner of one of these companies, right? So, well, everyone has a stake in the business, and there's a number of equity forms, direct shares, retirement programs, and phantom stock, and a variety of other equity forms, and those are actually used in these 3 different companies. So, owners participate, right? You can feel that. There's open book management so that they have financial information, a lot of financial information, so that they can act like an owner no matter what level of the organization. There's an engagement with employees so that there's meaningful day-to-day decisions and that people's opinions are valued. You'll definitely find division of labor in these companies, but you'll also find that these owners have influence even though they're not climbing the corporate ladder. The financial language of these owners is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be very focused on making money, long-term financial performance. There's a focus on short-term profitability, but they're not driven for quarterly earnings, and they're not distracted from raising capital or planning exit strategies. There's a very strong people's values and culture in these kind of companies, and so these are people that really believe that business is not a zero-sum game, right? You win and I lose, or I win and you lose. So dilution happens in these companies, and it's not the end of the world. It's far from it. These companies are profitable, so if my share goes down and my wealth goes up, I'm good with that. So where would you find employee-owned companies? And what kind of companies are these? So you'll find in every industry sector, you'll find from small to large, in the United States and around the world in different shapes and forms. In the United States, we have 10,000 companies that have broad-based employee ownership. Now, about 3,000 of them are majority-owned, majority employee-owned, which means that the majority of the ownership is with the employees, and that the majority of the employees have a stake in the business. Now, some of these companies are well known and are on best places to work list. The largest employee-owned company that we have in the U.S. is a company called Publix. It's a supermarket chain largely in Florida and Georgia. It's 139,000 employees. And they explicitly compete on value, and they say that they're not going to follow the race to the bottom, which some of their competitors are doing through their labor practices, and Publix is succeeding. One of the most innovative companies in the U.S. is W.L. They're employee-owned. One of the oldest companies in the U.S. is King Arthur Flour, and they're employee-owned. Now, there's also minority-owned companies, companies that have employee ownership that are in minority position, that are really very participative in their cultures. And I would put Google and Southwest Airlines in that category. There's, and in the film, we have a worker cooperative, and there are several hundred worker cooperatives in the United States. They require shares to be purchased, and they manage in a participative manner to include that they are managed democratically. And so that's one worker, one vote. So does this matter, right? You know, is there an impact on performance? Well, I said it in the beginning, and there's over 100 research studies that show when you have broad-based employee ownership and participation, you have a better performing firm than its peers. And also, interestingly, compared to before a company would have adopted employee ownership and afterwards there's performance change. So what are some of the areas where the most significant change in performance occurs? Higher sales and productivity, lower turnover rates. There's higher resilience during recessions, and specifically the last 2 recessions. There's greater wealth to the employee, and there's lower credit default rates, around the 1% area, and that includes the small and mid-sized employee-owned companies. So I'm a fan, but employee ownership is not a panacea. It doesn't work for every person, it doesn't work for every company. If employee ownership is used as a wage concession, it doesn't work. Employee ownership is good for supplementing retirement plans, but should not be a single stock in someone's retirement program, for their nest egg. So that's not good. And if you have, a fatally flawed business, adding employee ownership is not going to turn that company around. It's been tried, but it doesn't work. So if this is so good, why don't we have more of this in the U.S. and internationally? Well, first again, I'll say again, it's not for every person, it's not for every company. Second, it's not easy, and it evolves over time, which means leadership has to understand that it's an investment administratively and in education. Another issue that we have is that federal regulations actually cause industry to narrow versus broaden distribution of stock compensation. We also have business owners and entrepreneurs that don't actually ask about employee ownership, and professional service advisors for them maybe don't understand the full range of employee ownership options, and ownership and alternative ownership is largely overlooked in business school curriculum and entrepreneurship centers. What we're finding is that awareness and education does make a difference and does address these challenges, which my opinion is good, it's just time, because we have one of the biggest business transitions of ownership already occurring. And with the aging baby boomer population, there will be trillions in assets in closely held and family-owned businesses that will likely be changing hands. So ownership of these assets will be owned by whom? And this is mainstream. So that's something that, we're thinking, this is an area where we can look at being more inclusive in the ownership of these companies. So my challenge to you is to ask you, before I get to my challenge, I'll put another thing forward, is that when you think about these transitions, we can have an economy that is divided by capital owners and by wage workers, right? And that includes white-collar workers now. So in this transition, that could go to the traditional capital owners, or we could see a view of the economy where the wage worker is actually the new capital owner, thus tearing down the divide between those who own the capital and those who work for those who own the capital. So that's my challenge. And my challenge to you is, what if we didn't have that divide, or if that divide was much narrower? So what would that look like? So if you're in a company, if you lead a company, starting a company, financing a company, consider employee ownership. And although I mentioned that we have many, many existing equity tools in place, I believe that we need new tools and new strategies. And especially if you think about how do we want to make the shared economy truly a shared economy? So business has the power to change the workplace, and through that, we can change the norms of an economy. And broader ownership and meaningful ownership is what is necessary for a democracy to exist. And employee ownership can help bring that democracy because it brings economic democracy to the workplace. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, I'm here to coordinate the questions. So go ahead.
What's the difference between a employee-owned business and a customer-owned business?
Did you get that, Marianne?
Yeah, so what's the difference between an employee-owned business and a customer-owned business? I think in principle, they might have some similarities in that there's a business that is recognizing their stakeholders. But in this case, the customer-owned business is they're not an employee. So what we're looking at is specifically for those that help create wealth, how do you get that wealth back to those who create wealth? In this case, we're looking at the employee. I don't know if it's a broader question than customers, but there's definitely member-like companies, so their customers are members, and so I think that's a spectrum that is very interesting to be able to look at, where you don't make a divide between employees and customers, or maybe even really valuable supply chain members, and to look at having stakeholder ownership. And I know there's some thought being done in that. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Here.
I can see shared ownership, but what about employee performance and individual performance, and how, let's say, if you were to have poor performers, how they get exited from the company versus top performers, right? I mean.
Yeah. Okay, so in an employee-owned company, you'll find incentive packages that will be very much like a leading company would have. So you're trying to aspire the best individual performance, but also a group performance. Right. And so there's always that balance. But the HR practices are going to be such that if you have an individual that's not performing, then you'll look to see where other places that person could perform, and maybe they're just not in the right fit. But if you have somebody that's not performing well, even though they're an owner, there'll be a process to remove them from the company. And typically, what happens is they relinquish their ownership when they leave the company. There's sort of a misperception around employee ownership, and that is you operate at the lowest common denominator, right? And everybody's kind of lifting that person up. In fact, what happens is these companies have less supervision because there's a lot of peer-to-peer pressure for performance because everybody's an owner. And so, if somebody's not kind of holding their weight, you'll see a lot more of that peer-to-peer pressure encouraging people to better perform in that particular job or find something else to do.
Hey, please.
So as a company goes through its different stages of financing and the dilution occurs, I could see that the employee ownership could get to be pretty modest, right? And then, and how is the management handled in that respect? I mean, there are different levels. There are the different normal levels in equity ownership. When you get the structure plus the dilution, it gets to be problematic.
Yeah, it gets to be challenging, absolutely. Well, one thing is that every company is going to be different. One of the some of the research finding is that when people have even a small stake, they start acting like an owner. So So the stake is important, but again, it can be a small stake. What's really important is how people feel they're engaged and their ability to influence the profitability or the decisions in the company. And so that's important in terms of how, as an organization grows, and they're able to engage the lowest levels. You'll see like a cell divide type formation happening with these organizations. So they'll keep the units really small, maybe 100 or 150, and push decision making, discretionary decisions down at the bottom. So I know that doesn't get to the dilution question, but I am trying to say that the stakes matters. But again, if ultimately you see that profitability is going up and there's growth, you have to have growth, then you see that your wealth will increase. And again, from a dilution issues are very hard to manage, and who gets it, and if they're non-executives and it's executives, a lot of these companies have 80% of their wealth in non-executives' hands. Liquidity is an issue. Founding generations liquidity is an issue. So if any of you are finance people and love a good challenge, join an employee-owned company because we've got plenty of it.
Okay, there was a question here. Yes, please.
How does the employee ownership work financially from the employee's perspective? Do they get dividends or something? And what if they join or leave? Do they buy in and cash out, or how does that work?
Okay, so again, every company is going to be different in terms of how they structure it. There's some companies, like one of the companies has performance-based, and it's phantom stock. So I'm going to pick that extreme. So they don't actually have voting rights. It's phantom stock, and it's vesting phantom stock. So based on their performance every year, they get a percentage of that in cash, and it's calculated as a stock. And on the other side, in the film, I show a company that has an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP, and that's a trust structure and it's a retirement plan. And monies go in every year by the company. It's not the employee buying stock. And that's based on a number of things, typically a tenure. And then when they get to retirement age, they're able to liquidate out of that trust structure. Now, generally, with employee-owned companies, again, there's varieties, but generally, because you want to have the ownership embedded with those that have the stake in the business and are creating wealth for people. Typically, when people leave, they will, their direct stock, they will sell back to the company. And that could be at time zero when they leave, or phased over a period of time.
The gentleman then Gates.
I work as a personal financial planner, and we've seen a number of aging baby boomers trying to liquidate their businesses, trying to sell the business to employees. The general problem is the employees don't have any cash. They have to use the profits of the business to buy the company back from the founder. Do you have anything that you could do that we could use to enhance that, make those transitions work?
Yeah, so that's the strategic value of the employee stock ownership plan. It's the trust structure, and so what happens is that the trust is set up on behalf of the employees, and they will finance the purchasing of the founder's exit. Now that trust goes to the bank, and so it's debt finance, and then the company and then it's paid out and paid down through, like what you mentioned, the earnings of the company. So typically what you'll see, and this is when it works well, is the owner of the company phases out their ownership to the ESOP over time. And so you'll typically see like a 30% held to the ESOP, and you'll see 40%, you'll see 51%, and then you'll see 100%. So for transitions, that helps phase the debt financing and the earning out of that debt back to the employees.
Again?
So,
Yeah, just
okay.
How is the governance different in terms of management selection and evaluation and who chooses and monitors the CEO's performance?
Okay. When employee-owned companies that are not cooperative, what you'll typically find, day-to-day governance, let's just go to that. Day-to-day governance, which is, you're making a decision about a new business area, or you're making a decision about a product area, or the geographic area. That's usually done through traditional job descriptions, right? People have jobs, requirements to lead those kind of decisions. But you'll also find that there's a lot of committees that support those kind of decisions and strategic decisions. And the interesting thing with the committees is you'll see a mix. So it might not be just one business area or one level of the organization. You'll see the mix of executives and functional mix in decision making that you might not normally see. And I mention that because I think it's important. Governance isn't just at the board level. Governance is that companies feel they're stewards of the company as well, and that they're identifying if there's any risks that are being taken that might be punching a line below the water line, a hole below the water line. So those kind of decisions, again, it's very participative, and there's no tendency task force come and go and some standing committees. On the governance side, from the board of directors and elections of executives, it's very traditional that you'll see. But again, there's a lot more vetting of people. You'll see more hiring from within. In fact, when companies have lost employee ownership, because that has happened, they have brought people from the outside, and they didn't really understand the culture, and they didn't really understand the investments and the values that they were getting. The worker cooperatives is a very different governance structure, and there's elaborate kind of structures. What you'll see is a lot more employee participation on the board with voting rights. Some employee-owned companies you'll have non-voting right employees participating in the board. They're observers, and they're also trying to help the board understand some of the cultural things that are happening, and a technical perspective, for example, or a geographic perspective. But with the worker cooperatives, you'll definitely have voting rights there. And we have a system. If you're curious on this, we invested in a system in the Aspen Institute so that there are case studies written up on companies and specifically on governance. I thought it was really important. And you'll see a variety of those. The system is called the Curriculum on Employee Ownership, and most of the materials, unless it's Harvard, the materials are free. And so you're welcome to send me an email or go to that to see the examples that exist.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm curious about startups. Basically, the starting phase of a company is a very fragile one, and many of these questions are absolutely relevant for a startup as well. However, in that fragile phase, this seems to be an extra level of complexity, which if I was a founder, I wouldn't be sure that I would like to take on. Could you, and as you say, every company is different, but could you maybe bring an example or two that demonstrate the benefits of employee ownership for a startup?
Right. Well, first, most employee-owned companies that had in the United States were created because of conversions. Right? They were closely held and then converted. So that kind of tells you a little bit about the startup phase. Maybe it's not fully employee-owned, but then you convert into employee ownership later. The startups, what I find is just important to just have the discussion of equity and have this discussion early with members, a very open discussion about equity and allocation of equity and how dynamic this is. I think all too often what the dialogue is let's say if there's 3 owners, hey, we'll just divide this 3 ways and then we'll go off. And I think anyone in the room that's been in that situation realizes that there's complications that arise because not everybody's contributing a third, everyone has that value of a third, and people's lives change and they might not be around. So it's really important to put all of this on the table initially, which is, how do we have a dynamic view of equity so that it evolves and it expands as we evolve, and how do we have a system that's fair? Now, assuming fairness is important to you all, and but if you want to have that dialogue about people participating and contributing to the company, I think you're going to have to talk about the fairness of compensation and the fairness of equity. And again, it's dynamic, which means you may have a certain number of shares, but also that share might change. And what does it mean for your value? I mean, it's really surprising how little people understand about the role, the role of equity, the types of equities, and the value that they're actually getting. So looking at that on the table, I'd say would be the first approach. Some startups, and nobody's asked this question yet, but some startups just need external financing, and that's just the reality. And they've got a need for that. They don't have it through any of the owners, the founders, and so the challenge is if you get venture capital, it's very hard to exit into employee ownership. In fact, it doesn't work. The returns don't. You can't have the employees flying out to get and achieve the returns that venture capital is looking for. So I would say if you're getting an external financing, just like common sense, try to push out as far as possible. You get better valuation and minimize the amount of external financing you get. And you might have some additional employee ownership choices in the future.
Okay, one last question. I have to bias here. Okay, good.
Marianne, have you seen any companies combine an ESOP with a VC-style preferred stock rather than throwing common into the plan, but throwing in something that addresses all the questions you heard, such as full ratchet, anti-dilution protection, and liquidation preferences, and cumulative participating stock, and all the fun things that VCs get?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd love to know who asked that question, because I'd love to follow up with you.
Okay. My name's John Meyer. I'm a securities lawyer, and I'll send you an email. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. We do have examples of that, and so I could share with you how that's working. I think it's again the bundling of equity ownership, so ESOP and preferred and in common. I think there's just a treasure of activities. So I guess that's a pun, but anyway. Of being able to be clever in a good way, in a healthy way, to combine these instruments. So John, I'd love to talk to you more about that. But yes, those kind of deals are actually happening. And interestingly, even on the cooperative side, there's some very entrepreneurial cooperatives that are now looking at preferred stock positions as well as common stock. So I think there's an interest in trying to have kind of a inclusive ownership. We shouldn't hopefully be restricted by narrowness of one single tool, because I don't think one single tool is going to do it. Certainly as the company evolves.
Thank you.
Okay.